welcome to this special edition broadcast of the Rock Newman Show. And a special edition it is. The folks here at WHUT, in an ongoing effort to serve the community, to be relevant and topical and timely, have allowed us to bring you this show here. I have with me sitting at this table 3 individuals who really, in 6 days, have impacted policy, significant policy in the United States government, of the United States government. Please let me introduce you to my panel. Mary Grice, a civil servant for the U.S. government. Welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Rob Vogel with Vogel, Slade, and Goldstein, Miss Grice's attorney. Welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
Thank you, and nice to be here.
My pleasure to have you. Mark Fisher, you've been here before. Mark Fisher is senior editor, writer for the Washington Post. Mark Fisher is the gentleman who on a Friday of last week, what was that, the 11th? On the 11th of April, broke a story, major headlines above the fold in the Washington Post about a practice that had been initiated in 2011 by the Social Security Administration and the Treasury Department, whereby the Treasury Department was holding and attaching government refunds that were due taxpayers, oftentimes, as it was chronicled in this story, without proper notification for them, without justification, many say. We'll get into what the Social Security Administration and the Treasury Department had to say. Before I get to Ms. Grice and to Rob Vogel, Mark, what attracted you to this story?
Well, this is the kind of story that hits a nerve with the American people because it's about fairness and it's about justice. It's about the government doing something to people that people never thought their own government would do, which is to take their money without notice, as you said, and try to compensate the government for debts that people didn't know they owed, and that in many cases they didn't owe personally, but were in fact incurred by their parents, often their deceased parents. And so this violated a basic tenet of the American sense of fairness, which is children should not be held responsible for the debts of their parents. I knew as soon as I heard about this story from Ms. Grice and her lawyer that this was the kind of thing that would really get the goats of the American people. And then when it turned out that there were so many more people affected, just like Ms. Grice, it became clear this was going to be big.
It is obvious. I looked. It is obvious that it struck a real nerve. You guys had thousands of comments to this story.
Oh, it's been off the charts. It's been #1 on the Washington Post site. It's gone viral. It's been in media across the country. And as a result, I've heard from hundreds and hundreds of people who've been similarly affected, who were expecting their tax refunds, in some cases depending on their tax refunds to make ends meet. And instead, they find that their own government has confiscated, intercepted those tax refunds to pay off a debt they never knew about, a debt that in many cases is decades old, and that the government is unable to provide evidence even existed.
Mary Grice, you are a civil servant for the government of the United States. You are the central figure in this article that was written that is sort of shaking up Capitol Hill, is shaking up policy throughout this land. Tell us your story. When did you first become aware that there was a problem in paradise?
The first thing that led me down this road was a notice I received from the State of Maryland's Comptroller Office on February the 7th, stating that my state tax refund had been intercepted, which is the term they used, to offset a debt I owed to a federal government agency. That notice also stated that I would be receiving a follow-up notice letting me know what agency. And on February the 10th, I did receive such notice that told me it was the Social Security Administration. I called, couldn't get any answers, so I went into my local office in Silver Spring and I still couldn't get any answers. And some of the answers that I did get were just totally absurd. And, you know, it's like, well,
What were your questions? And give me an example of a response.
Okay. When I spoke to a woman on the phone, even she couldn't understand why this so-called debt was being resurrected. She said, it's so old, I don't understand it. Well, clearly she couldn't give me any more answers. But when I went into the local office in person, the young man said, well, we sent a notice in August of 2012 to a post office box in North Carolina. And I'm like, I haven't had that post office box since 1979. I've lived here in the state of Maryland since 1982. And he said, well, another notice was sent in October of 2013. And I said, what address did you send it to? He said, I don't know. That information is not in my computer. And I also asked, well, am I the particular beneficiary under my dad's account number who received the overpayment? And his answer was, I don't know. We look at all of the beneficiary under my dad's account as a complete unit. And I said, well, then how can I be signaled out as the one responsible for the debt? And his answer was, we come down the list until we get to one who can pay.
So, you know, to put this in numerical perspective, this debt started to accrue some 50 years ago.
To be honest with you,
The so-called overpayment was started, what they are saying, alleging, was started 50 years ago.
I don't know exactly how long ago. They couldn't share that information with me. They're just saying that I stopped receiving benefits in April of 1975 under my dad's account.
39 years ago, if I'm
Yes.
counting correctly, yes.
His account number was not flagged until 1977.
Okay.
They can't say whether it was me or one of my other 4 siblings who received the overpayment. They couldn't say whether it was my dad's first wife who had received benefits. So there was a lot of information that was missing when I talked to the Social Security clerk.
And, okay, so you go through that process and you really don't get any satisfactory answers.
Correct.
And then what was your next move?
Well, I called Rob's and I said, can they do this? Is it legal? And I explained to Rob everything that I had been told at the Social Security office. And he's like, that's not right. And he did some research and we moved forward from there.
Rob, you got that call. What was your reaction?
Well, first of all, Mary is somebody that I've known for quite a while.
Okay.
She used to work with my wife, and she's a family friend.
Okay.
So she called with a legal problem and mentioned it had to do with some, the Social Security Administration thought that she was responsible for an overpayment. My first reaction was, well, it's kind of out of my area. I don't handle those kinds of cases. Then I realized, you know, I actually once did handle an overpayment case, and it really stuck in my craw, that whole experience. It was emotionally draining, exhausting, and I felt like, why? I represented a woman who was being accused of having an overpayment that she needed to repay, and she had a daughter who was about 14 or 15. And the overpayment was sent to her through no fault of her own. She had actually reported her income. They should have stopped sending her payments, but they continued. She reported the problem to the Social Security Administration, but they kept telling her it's fine and kept sending her the money. And at the end of the day then, she went back multiple times, and when she finally went back and talked to a supervisor and said, there's something wrong here, the supervisor agreed. And then they sent her a notice saying that she owes many thousands of dollars back for the overpayment. And in the end of the day, they determined that it was her fault for getting the overpayment and not setting it all aside and returning it immediately. Yeah. And what got me was they were also sending a separate notice to her based on her daughter. So they were sending it actually addressed to her daughter, who was about 14, care of the mother, saying that the daughter also owed several $1,000s. It was $6,000 or $7,000.
Right.
And when I went through the process with this woman, I went into the office of the Social Security Administration, the field office, to try to get answers, to try to take care of things, and saw how rough the process is on people, how they get wrong answers and different answers, whoever they talk to. And I talked to a supervisor, and one of the things that I was curious about is, why in the world are you sending two different payment notices, one for the mother and one for the daughter? And she looked at me in the eye and said, well, because when the daughter turns 18, if she's working, she's got a job, we can recover that money from her. Mm. And I can tell you, I had to hold in my temper.
Yeah. Let me say this. In the spirit of fairness and objectivity, we called the Social Security Administration and invited them to be a part of our panel here today. Obviously, they didn't show up. They have their reasons why. There seems to be a hue and cry that what is going on with Ms. Grice, the example you just gave, there are multiple horror stories out there. I think that we should establish that Social Security Administration is a humongous bureaucracy. And at the end of the day, they do a lot of good work. That is not to excuse these kinds of transgressions. So if I can have you to continue, you got a call from Ms. Grice.
Yes.
And
Yes.
kind of walk us through the process from there.
And so I just gave you the background of something that was in me from a couple of years ago, sort of an unresolved feeling of anger. Mm-hmm. And when she told me, can you help me out? She asked me, can you help me out? And I thought, well, I don't do overpayment cases, and what first came back to me was this feeling of exhaustion and frustration that I'd gone through. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, but actually I have done an overpayment once, and that means I've probably done one more overpayment case than any lawyer that I know.
Yeah.
So let's hear it, and she described what was going on, and it was just appalling. And so I said,
that's a strong word,
right,
appalling.
Appalling.
Tell me why.
All right, Mary Grice receives a notice from the tax office, Maryland Controller's office, that she's not going to be getting her refund. No explanation. She has to call an 800 number and find out what's this about, and then go through a few more steps. And that's the way dealing with this agency typically is. You always have to go through a few more steps. You're put on hold for a couple of minutes or a couple of hours, before you can get anything useful. And so she then finds out that this is an overpayment, and she has no reason to believe she ever got paid one dime that wasn't supposed to be paid for her. And this was 39 years ago. Right. And so it's somebody else's overpayment that they're pinning on her. She's gotten no notification, and they've seized her tax refunds. Well, all right, in this country, first of all, if I tell you you owe me something, I've got to go prove it in court before I can force you to give it to me. I can't just take your money. That's called theft. Yeah. And so she was the victim of theft. As far as, that's a total denial of due process. So that's number one.
One of the responses I got on Facebook was that it was like, someone got jacked.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right. So that's number one. I am a plaintiff's lawyer. I would really love it if I could take people's money and then make them fight me to get it back. That would be great for my business, but not a great system of law.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, it's not her, it's somebody who they can't name. And number three, it's ancient. I mean, we're talking about 1977, 78. I think of Bucky Dent hitting a home run, for the Yankees.
Right.
Where were you in 1978? If they sent a notice to me where I was in 1978, it would be somewhere in the Catskills where I spent some summer working as a waiter. So that's what struck me, is this is on so many levels wrong. We've got to do something about this.
We're going to come back because we want to get really deep into this here, and we'll come back after this break.
The station reflects our community in all of its diversity. In its programming for news and art and culture, I celebrate this marvelous local resource, Howard University Television. This is Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. I support WHUT because WHUT supports our community.
Become a WHUT member today and let us say thank you. With a generous gift of $50, you'll receive a WHUT color change digital alarm clock. With a $70 gift, you'll receive a WHUT water filtration sport bottle. With a $100 gift, you'll receive a WHUT e-reader holder and membership card granting you benefits like 2-for-1 meals in the local DC area. With a $130 gift, you'll receive a WHUT blanket, matrix cooler, and a WHUT membership card. And with a $190 gift, you'll receive all of the above. Call us today to find out what you'll receive with your generous gift. Join thousands of your neighbors in saying that public television makes a difference in your life. Become a member of WHUT, Howard University Television, today. Please call 1-866-900-WHUT right now.
And there's a rumor circulating that is scandalous.
Oh no, what's that?
And I need to clear it up. I
Okay.
think I know the answer.
Didn't sleep with the president.
Well, here's what I'm going to ask you.
Okay, all right.
How old were you when you first had your first real kiss?
Oh my God, I don't know. Okay, let me be like I'm in a hearing on Capitol Hill. I can't recall.
Folks, welcome back to the Rock Newman Show here on WHUT. My three guests in this hour: Mary Grice, civil servant; Rob Vogel, an attorney; and Mark Fisher, senior editor for the Washington Post, who broke a story that ran last Friday that has really had an impact on Capitol Hill. Before we went to break, Rob Vogel was explaining sort of your horror story. If you could share, when you were going through this process, Ms. Grice, what were you feeling?
Outrage, shock, and wondering why me, you know, especially since I knew nothing about it. So, long story short, I feel like I have been found guilty and I'm serving my sentence, which is to have my refunds intercepted, but I was not allowed to have a trial to prove I was guilty. And that is just totally unfair. And once the story broke, we realized how many other people across the U.S. this is affecting. And as I've told Rob and Mark, if I owe the debt and they can prove to me I owe the debt, I don't have a problem with paying it because I believe in paying my debts. But it makes me feel the manner in which they've gone about to collect this alleged debt is they arbitrarily pulled a number out of the air and said, okay, they actually did an inquiry on my credit report. Let's see, it was May 2nd of 2012. So they had my correct address, but it's like, we're gonna make you pay, you know, but we don't have to show you anything. We're the government. That's the wrong attitude to have.
You know, I think that's certainly a strong argument that that is the wrong attitude to have. The Social Security Administration and U.S. Treasury maintained that they have identified $2 billion in debts that in various forms of overpayment. We talk in this country daily about the deficits that exist. We talk about the Social Security fund going broke. I want to ask both of you, Mark first, and then you from a legal perspective. Why should the Social Security Administration not be able to be allowed to use some aggressive forms to recover money that are in fact, that they can approve are in fact overpayments? Now, Mark, you've talked to people across the country. I'd like to get your perspective on that first, please.
Well, I think everyone would agree that when the country is in difficult financial straits, that it makes sense to collect on debts that people genuinely owe to the government. I've not heard anyone disagree with that. The problem here is one of both due process and a question of fairness. And so when you tell people you owe a debt, but you're unwilling to explain to them where the debt came from. When you tell people you owe a debt, but we didn't notify you properly that you had this debt. When you tell people for all of American history that we're not going after debts more than 10 years old, and then suddenly do a complete reversal and retroactively kind of activate all of these decades-old debts, that violates people's sense of fairness. And when you approach these cases with such a sense of carelessness, such as with Miss Grice's case, where the government knew her current correct address and sent Social Security statements there just like we all receive every year, she would get those in the mail. And when it comes to notifying her of this important piece of information about an old debt that they've decided to collect, and they send that notification to a 30-year-old post office box in a state she hasn't been in decades, that does not show a level of care or customer service that you would expect from an efficient government.
Care and customer service, Mark talks about. What say you about the legal ramifications of what has happened, and what can you accomplish as her attorney to help resolve this matter?
Right, well, because the Social Security Administration is so huge, it has an elaborate system for dealing with disputes with beneficiaries, including when they're trying to recover overpayments. First of all, one of the things that I know is that virtually no attorneys handle these cases. It's virtually impossible for someone in Mary's position, if they don't know someone who's a lawyer, to get any help. So they're on their own. And they go through this labyrinth.
And dealing with a bureaucracy, any bureaucracy, if you're on your own, it's like whistling past the graveyard.
Right, and they do deny the first request to either reconsider their decision or perhaps waive the enforcement. And there's different ramifications. If you just don't ask for reconsideration and do ask for a waiver, you can be jeopardizing your position, but they don't tell you that. But so it's difficult to recover in these for the beneficiary to get fair treatment in these situations. And I agree that there should be pursuit of overpayments, particularly where the beneficiary has failed to do what they're supposed to do. But here you're talking about a debt that's more than 10 years old. Now, if they shift the burden to someone like Mary to prove her innocence, it is impossible to prove your innocence when somebody says you owe them money from 10, 20, 35, 37 years ago, because you don't keep your records. Yeah. If somebody tells you on top of that, oh, and it wasn't even your debt, well, is Mary responsible for keeping 37-year-old records from her parent, from her siblings? I mean, that's crazy. So on that level, it struck me as, you're setting up an impossible situation. And then, of course, sending the notice to the wrong address, so they're taking her money before she even gets a chance to say to them, prove it.
You filed a case on her behalf. What is your complaint?
My complaint, and I decided that this is an appropriate case to take directly into U.S. Federal District Court, okay, as opposed to going through the administrative process, because there are serious constitutional issues here. There's at least 4 of them that I've identified. Okay?
And what are they?
Right, number 1, failure of notice. The fundamental element of due process is notice and opportunity to be heard. She got none of that. Number 2 is that at some point this claim that they allege that they had against her was barred by a statute of limitations, and they've revived it from the dead, okay? All right.
Barred by statute of limitations, but changed. We're going to get in. We
right,
definitely want to get into that a little
so
later.
So they don't resurrect dead claims in our system. I believe that is unconstitutional in this case. Number 3, you don't hold a child responsible for the debt of the parent. Now I'm listing that third, but I mean, to me on a gut level, that's the worst of all. And number 4, they told her that we can't tell you which of your siblings or perhaps your father's ex-wife got this overpayment. We just know it's on your father's account. And she said to them, show me the evidence. And the Social Security office said, I can't do that. I can only show you evidence that pertains specifically to you. So we've got, the confrontation clause is part of the Constitution. You have the right to confront your accuser, to review evidence. She was denied that right. So that's 4 of them.
Mark, you took this case on and you started to do some research. You now have talked to a multitude of people throughout the country. Give me some of the feedback you've gotten from them and some of their stories.
Well, a lot of people are outraged on Ms. Grice's behalf, on behalf of the 400,000 people who Social Security says have these debts that are more than 10 years old that they're going after. But then I heard from hundreds and hundreds of people who have already had their tax refunds taken from them. Now, some of them, it was a couple of $100s. It's not going to be a life or death kind of situation. But some of them, it was several $1,000s in families where that's the difference between making ends meet and not.
Yeah.
And in those cases, these people are absolutely perplexed. They don't have a lawyer like Rob Vogel.
Sure.
They don't have anyone to turn to. And so they feel lost. They feel like their government has taken money from them that's rightfully theirs. This is not a payment from the government. This is a refund of money that they already paid to the government. And so they need that money, and they don't have the notice, they don't have an understanding of why this happened. And what really outrages people is this retroactive changing of the statute of limitations. So it used to be debts of more than 10 years old were dead, now they're back live again. People write and they say, is there a group out there that we can get together with? Is there a class action? Is there some way that we can get our money back? We now have a reversal of the policy from Social Security where they say, because of our stories in this case, they're not going to go collecting these old debts anymore. And, hallelujah, we'll celebrate that. Yeah. But that doesn't bring anyone their money back. Yeah. And so there's still very live, important questions.
And that is something that is halted. It is right now. And then the process is under review. It is not like the policy or the law has changed.
Right.
We really are going to want to get into how there was a 10-year statute of limitation. There was a farm bill that came up in 2008 that initiated this change. Somewhere in the process where the farm bill went to the president, President Bush at the time vetoed the bill. He was overridden by Congress. And something was slipped in, and if I can read the specific language here that is somewhat frightening, it says, the amendment to this bill authorizes the offset of federal tax refunds irrespective of the amount of time the debt has been outstanding. And irrespective means forever. I mean, we're talking 37 years. If someone deemed 50, 60 years ago, the way that this bill was written and what was inserted, eliminating the statute of limitation, this could go on forever.
And this is the reporting. This is the reporting that we're doing now. We're trying to figure out how that got into that law. So who slipped that into the Farm Bill? The congressman who voted on it had no idea that was in there. It's a 900-page bill. They're just voting on the larger bill. Yeah. So how did that get in there? And in the reporting so far, we've had a festival of finger pointing, where Social Security says go talk to Treasury. Treasury says go talk to Congress. Congress says this had to come from the bureaucracy somewhere. So we're still involved in that circle and trying to get to the bottom.
This says something about the legislative process of the U.S. government, because part of in our research here at WHUT that we determined is that sometimes language can go into a bill like this without anything being written, that there in these certain appropriations can be done verbally, and at the end of the day there's no real voting record for anyone to be held accountable.
Well, there's a vote on the larger bill, but there are so many provisions within the bill that it's hard to parse out how exactly did each provision get in there, who was behind that. Somewhere there are memos that will help us with that, and we're still trying to dig those out.
Mary Grice, civil servant for the U.S. government.
Almost
now
32 years.
You and your attorney have filed suit.
Yes.
Is it against the Treasury? Is it against the Social Security Administration? Whichever. It is a part of the U.S. government. How has that impacted your life, on a personal basis?
So far, it hasn't.
Okay.
I'm still going about my day-to-day duties. As far as I know, I'm still employed by the U.S. government, just a different agency. Yes.
Do you anyway feel threatened that you're taking this action? It's really a two-part question. Do you feel threatened, one? And two, do you feel like a hero? I asked that latter question, do you feel like a hero? Because this story ran 6 days ago. You were the central figure. And now the Social Security Administration has announced as of a couple of days ago as a result of the story that Mark Fisher did. We like to think we had a little impact in our conversation with them. Rob Vogel's great work, that they are halting that practice.
Right.
You feel like a hero at all?
No, I feel that I'm blessed more than anything else. I'm blessed that even though my refund was intercepted, I still haven't missed a meal. I still have my roof over my head. I still have a vehicle to drive. You know, I still have my job, but it's always good to have good friends in the same place as you. I don't look at myself as a hero, but my mom taught us, you stand up for what you believe in, you stand up for what is right. I only looked at this, and I learned a long time ago, sometimes if you look at the broad picture, that can be a little intimidating to you, but if you keep your focus narrow, so my focus was narrowed just on myself. I mean, I wasn't thinking, oh, well, go fight for everyone across the U.S. It was like, no, I want to get to the bottom of my case and find out what's going on. And because of that, it has now impacted the whole nation.
Yeah, your journey absolutely is having a tremendous impact across the land.
Yes, and I'm overwhelmed. A friend said, go to Google, put in Mary Grice and tax refund, and when all of the stories came up, you know, all the way up to Canada, to the UK, and I was floored. I'm like, I had no idea. I asked both Rob and Mark, did you have any idea that, you know, that this would be like a wildfire and just spread as it did? And Rob he's shaking his head like, no, I really didn't.
So Rob, okay, there is still a fight. There is still there is still something. They still have some of her money. Some of the money was released.
No, they've got all of her money. They had taken more than their fair share. They had taken both her state tax refund and her federal refund, so they had double collected. So they've at least gotten it back, so they now just have 100% instead of about 150%.
Well, they actually, right now, they only have the $29.96 that they alleged
that they're saying
was the
that
overpayment.
Is owed, and they had taken more than that between the two returns.
Yes,
Right.
but the difference has been sent back to me.
Okay, and what's sort of the legal process now?
Yep. So as she said, I didn't expect this kind of firestorm. I just thought I was filing a lawsuit, but we did want to get a resolution in federal court so that it could have an impact on people like Mary, so that you can get a legal precedent set. As I said, we're alleging constitutional violations, so we have to wait for the government to respond. Now, the Social Security Administration yesterday, as you were saying, came out and said that they're going to put a halt to this practice going forward. But they've said nothing about the people who have had their tax refunds seized to date. And that's a big problem. We're going to have to figure out how that's addressed in Mary's case, and there's going to have to be a resolution for everyone else who's in a similar situation. They have not addressed the underlying problem of taking debts, incurred by parents and getting the debts collected from the children. So these are still things that the Social Security Administration is going to have to answer to.
Mark, when you wrote this story, somewhere shortly thereafter, we got a short time before the break, you got a call from Barbara Mikulski, Senator Mikulski, and Senator Boxer's offices. What did they say and what impact has that had?
Well, very quickly after the story came out, Senators Boxer and Mikulski put out a statement saying they were outraged by the behavior of the government and the bureaucracy, and they thought that there was a fairness issue here, and they urged Social Security to do exactly what they've now done, which is to stop that practice. And then, of course, Senator Grassley of Iowa also put some pressure on. So we don't know exactly which pressure worked, but whether it was from the White House House or from these congressmen, but apparently people were feeling the heat in Social Security and at the Treasury, and so there has been this change of tone from them. But as Rob pointed out, there's a long way to go, because my email box is full of hundreds of accounts from families across the country who had their money taken, and ceasing the debt collection going forward doesn't help them at all.
This really could be a show that, if we had put a title on it, that could have been 6 Days That Makes a Difference in U.S. Policy. The three people here who are with me, Mary Grice, Rob Vogel, and Mark Fisher, have had an impact on policy throughout this land. We're really happy to have you here on the Rock Newman Show. More when we come back after these messages.
Hello, I'm Congressman Elijah Cummings. I salute WHUT for providing news and public affairs programming that uniquely represents, engages, and informs viewers. Whether it's local, national, or world events, WHUT keeps you connected to the issues of the day. Please support WHUT by calling the number on your screen. Thank you.
Become a WHUT member today and let us say thank you. With a generous gift of $50, you'll receive a WHUT color change digital alarm clock. With a $70 gift, you'll receive a WHUT water filtration sport bottle. With a $100 gift, you'll receive a WHUT e-reader holder and membership card granting you benefits like 2-for-1 meals in the local DC area. With a $130 gift, you'll receive a WHUT blanket, matrix cooler, and a WHUT membership card. And with a $190 gift, you'll receive all of the above. Call us today to find out what you'll receive with your generous gift. Join thousands of your neighbors in saying that public television makes a difference in your life. Become a member of WHUT, Howard University Television, today. Please call 1-866-900-WHUT right now.
We announced the results of the National Assessment of Education Progress. The District of Columbia was #1.
Explain your position, the name of the football team that comes after Washington.
I think people recognize that, first of all, change is inevitable, and it's time for a change with this name.
Folks, welcome back to the Rock Newman Show here at WHUT. My guests who remain, Mary Grice, a civil servant for the U.S. government, and her attorney, Rob Vogel. Mary Grice was a victim, as many are saying, of an overreach by the U.S. government, by arms of the U.S. government, by the Social Security Administration, who maintained that she was responsible for a debt that had been incurred decades earlier by her parents, on her father's account, and she is saying, and her attorney is alleging, that without notice, her money was taken by the Treasury Department, her state of Maryland income tax refund, and the refund from the Internal Revenue Service. Both were taken without any notice. You have now sort of taken up the banner and are looked at as the poster child of those who are fighting this across the country. What impact is this having on you?
Well, I've gotten nothing but positive feedback from people that I know, and especially my family. Mm-hmm. And financially, I mean, I would like to have my money back, but, you know, if I don't get it, I'm okay with that, because I've stated all along, if I owe the debt, I have no problems with paying it. My coworkers keep asking for an autograph.
Do you have any question about whether or not you might really owe the debt?
Yes, I do. Simply because when I spoke to them in the local Social Security office, I asked for a copy of the complete record, and I was told that, well, some of it was archived. I'd need to do a request under the Freedom of Information Act to the Baltimore office. And I'm like, well, did I get this overpayment? Oh, well, we don't know. And someone on the account did. And so I call that sloppy record keeping.
As an attorney, you might not like to hear a client say, well, maybe I might owe it.
No, but what she's really saying is she has no idea who got an overpayment, and neither do they. And since they're the ones saying that she owes it back, we expect that they have the burden of proving it, and they've just punted on that. You know, the idea that there's some evidence of this somewhere, and she asks, can I see the evidence? And they say, well, you'll have to do a Freedom of Information Act request to get the evidence that you're liable to us. And it doesn't bother us at all because we've already taken your money, so have a good day. That doesn't work for me.
So you filed the complaint. It has to go, you actually filed with the U.S. court.
Yes.
With the federal court.
Yes. And then, okay, so the procedure is I filed last Monday, a week ago, I guess 8 days ago.
Okay.
And the funny thing is that when you sue the U.S. government, there's an elaborate procedure you have to follow to make sure they're notified. So I had to fill out certified mail, return receipt requested, and send a copy to the Acting Commissioner of Social Security, send a copy to Attorney General Holder, and send a copy to the United States Attorney for the District of Maryland. And so you have to then be able to prove to the court that you've put all these people on notice. And if you can't do that, you don't have a lawsuit. You can't proceed. And that's the way it should be if the Social Security Administration is going to be pursuing people for these overpayments that may or may not have been incurred by them. They should be able to prove, they should have to prove before they can take any money. Not that they dug out an address that once belonged to this person, but that they've actually done what they needed to do to notify the person that they owed a debt. The standard, the constitutional standard, is that they actually had to do something that a person who really wanted to find the other person would have done. Something that a reasonable person who really wanted to find the person would have done in order to notify them. And that means, in this case, they've got the Social Security statement that they send her every year. Why not look at that and send it to the same place?
You know, I am seeing in many of the responses to the article that Mark Fisher wrote that the folks are trying to turn this into a political football. That this particular case right now has the potential to be turned into a political football, saying where there may be some who are able to use it as ammunition to criticize Barack Obama. This collection process didn't really start until 2011, although the law changed that allowed it to happen in 2008 under George Bush. What say you about that?
This goes back. It is to me, it's a cultural problem within the Social Security Administration that goes way back many, many years. And the root of it is that people who may have gotten overpayments and against whom the Social Security Administration wants to collect the overpayments, they're considered a very low priority. The high priority is getting people benefits, people who have a daily need, who might not survive without getting immediate benefits. All the resources are directed there. So the overpayment is sort of an afterthought, and the way people are treated is sort of an afterthought. And this certainly goes back many years, if not decades. So that's the root of this. So the statute gets changed in 2008. Now, I mentioned I handled a previous case, and that concerned events that preceded Barack Obama's administration. Nothing changed. So President Obama comes into office. He's already got the statute in place. In 2011, the Social Security Administration issues this regulation to conform to the statute, and things go forward. It has nothing to do with politics. This is a legal problem. This is a systemic problem in an agency that has been there as long as I have looked at this agency. And because of the fact that it involves people who can't get access to attorneys, there's no visibility on it until now. and so now that there's visibility on it, it's up, we'll see how the Obama administration deals with rectifying this problem, but I would not put it on them at all up to this point. I hope that this doesn't become a political football, because it's really an issue of legal rights that nobody likes. There's nobody that I know who you would consider liberal, and nobody that I know who you'd consider conservative who likes what's been happening.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd say is I wouldn't put this on the Treasury Department. Treasury Department's fulfilling its duties. They get a certification from the Social Security Administration that says this person owes us a debt, keep their tax refund. The Treasury Department must do that. So I don't put this on them either.
There are people out here across this land, and you now, as we said, who become the poster child for this cause, whether you intended that to happen or not. What would you say to individuals who either already have had their monies seized, or who may think that there's a great likelihood that money would be taken? What should average Joe be doing now to inoculate themselves against something like this?
Well, my first suggestion would be find yourself a good attorney. If not, call mine.
That's a rather eloquent plug,
yeah,
Mr. Vogel.
But I mean, he has been
Yeah.
inundated with phone calls, emails from people wanting to know, can you help me also? But I say that too often when it comes to the little guy, and I consider myself one of the little guys, when things come from us, from the government, a lot of them feel intimidated.
Yeah,
it's
sure,
like it's the government, they must automatically be correct. That's not always the case. But I say no matter how big or how small your refund is that you're expecting, stand up for what you believe in and see if you can find yourself a good attorney.
You're talking about a very real issue right here, because I'm telling you, no matter who we are, we go to the mailbox and you see a letter from the IRS, our heart rate goes up.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
No
What do
question
they
about
want now?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Now, she gave her version of what sort of the little guy should do, Rob. Let's hear
I
a
would
little
say
more from you on that.
You go to the Social Security office, and obviously the Social Security office, like any other government bureau, has people who are going there to do a good job and working hard and trying to do the best they can.
Right.
And yet they're trained on how to react to situations. Someone comes in, talking about an overpayment, and so they're going to give you information. Do not make the mistake of thinking that they're your friend. They may be friendly, but they might also be asking you to do something that might not be in your best interest to do. So unfortunately, most people don't have legal training, and they certainly don't have legal training in this area.
Rob, that statement could be construed as an accusation that there is a systemic culture within the Social Security Administration that would be misleading to the average citizen.
I actually think that's a correct statement. That because of the policies that have developed over many years of the way they handle overpayment situations, that and this is based on my experience representing this former client and dealing with this situation, where the person goes in and gets information which they rely on to their detriment. In other words, they're told to do something and they think it's the right thing, but it actually hurts them to do this. They fill out a form not knowing how it's going to be reacted to. And they shouldn't be filling out that form at that time. They should be taking it back, figuring out what the consequences are. It would be great if they had legal counsel, but the problem is they can't get legal counsel because the amounts of money are too small for lawyers to get involved in typically, and there's no how-to guides other than what the Social Security Administration tells you. So you naturally rely on these government people to help you, but it is a real problem. I think it needs a top-to-bottom review.
Mr. Grice, does this shake your faith in the fairness of the United States government and how it treats its ordinary citizens?
Yes. You know, you really sometimes don't think about these types of things ahead of time, and when it happens to you, you know, I've worked almost 32 years with the federal government, and before that, for the state of North Carolina, and you know, you consider yourself to be a good citizen. You're law-abiding. You do what's right, and then it's like, bam, a slap in the face. You know, we could treat you any kind of way we want because we're the government. And I just have a problem with that. And as some of my friends and even relatives have said to me, boy, they just didn't know. You weren't the one to pick on.
Rob, as her partner in the eye of this storm here, do you foresee anything growing across the country where perhaps something like a class action suit will be initiated?
That's definitely a possibility. And that's something that I've given thought to, you know, for since I've looked at this case. So that might grow out of this. I think a much more effective resolution would be if the administration, the Social Security Administration itself, simply did the right thing. Simply looked at this and said, you know what, we need to give these people their money back. If we've taken their money and it was on an allegation that they got an overpayment that's more than 10 years old, we're going to just figure out a way to get them their money back.
Now, let me ask you the viability of that, because Social Security Administration is impacted by the language that went into this farm bill. The language that went into this farm bill removed the statute of limitation. So to some extent, the Social Security Department is acting within the four corners of the law and the policy if, in fact, they can go back and retroactively collect this money for debts that they can establish that are owed.
What they can do is pay back everybody the same way they took their money in the first place, namely just authorize the IRS to give the refunds, and then start from scratch.
Then start all over.
If they think that that's suitable. In other words, so if they then determine that it is okay to go after old debts, and they have the proof, and we're not talking about just a computer flag that says, you know, something went up in 1977, we don't know the circumstances, but it says $2,996 owed to us. No, if they're willing to spend the resource and go through the records and establish that you incurred a debt and you should pay it to them, okay. Then we can debate whether they should be doing that, okay, or whether they have better uses for the resources, but start over, do it the right way. Certainly when they're taking the refunds from the kids, you know, they need to just give that back and in my view, try something else.
There's a tall, lanky, some people say handsome guy who has the bully pulpit of the presidency. His name is Barack Hussein Obama. If you had an opportunity to have a conversation with him, as a matter of fact, he watches the Newman show on WHUT, I am sure.
Okay.
So, what would you say to President Obama?
I would ask him to do any and everything that he could to make sure that the different arms of the government that impact the little people follow proper procedures, and to document, so that when something like this comes up and the individual goes to that arm of the government, Social Security if you want to use them, and say, you know what, can you please show me the evidence? If they can do that, then I don't have a problem. That's the way it should be. That was the way Social Security should have done it to begin with. And then who knows, maybe I would not be sitting here today. But they failed to do that, and I'd like him to make sure that they fall in line. The other thing I'd like him to do is to find the culprit who inserted this amendment into the Farm Bill. And something that I had not heard for a long time, one of the commenters in the post said, whoever did it should be tar and feathered, you know?
Yeah.
I wouldn't go so far as to do that, but I'd like them to be called to task on it. I really would.
Yeah, and no question. And again, that speaks to the legislative process. That something so impactful, which we know of, which the Social Security Administration has determined, is 400,000 people that are targeted for these seizures.
Yes.
Those 400,000 people might really have something to say to the person that inserted that into the bill that stopped that. Let me ask you. Again, going back to the legal aspect of this. So for so long, if you can give us a quick answer here as we wrap up, this 10-year statute of limitation, what do you think went into the process of why someone would want to obliterate that and go back for that, eternity to be able to make these collections?
I really can't tell you because, if you can go back forever to collect debts based on overpayments of benefits, then it strikes me like that and murder are the only two things there are that don't have a statute of limitations. If you are dealing with a government contractor under the Contract Disputes Act, you've got 6 years if you make an overpayment.
I want to thank Mary Grice and Rob Vogel so much for coming on the Rock Newman Show here today. You two, along with Mark Fisher, who's a guest who just left us, have made an impact on this country all across the land. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Rock Newman Show at WHUT. And folks, thank you so much for watching.